It felt as though life had taken a wrecking ball to my soul. The days following my parents' passing blurred together into a fog of grief. I was barely holding myself together, going through the motions as if on autopilot. Each morning, I'd wake up with a pit in my stomach, realizing that the two people who had been my anchor were gone. My wife, Caroline, was my only solace, or so I thought. In the midst of the funeral arrangements and condolence calls, Caroline seemed distracted. At first, I chalked it up to her struggling with the situation. I convinced myself that this was her way of processing grief, even though she and my parents had never been particularly close. Still, I needed her, and I clung to the hope that we'd lean on each other to get through this. But something felt off. She wasn't home as much as I expected her to be. Excuses piled up, work meetings, errands, a last-minute dinner with a friend. I didn't have the energy to question it. I was too wrapped up in my own mourning to realize what was happening right under my nose. The truth hit me like a freight train one evening. I had just returned from meeting with the funeral director to finalize the arrangements for my mother's service. The house was eerily quiet when I walked in. Caroline wasn't there. Again. It wasn't unusual lately, but something about this particular evening gnawed at me. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a text message. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you." It was signed with a single initial, J. My heart sank. A wave of nausea rolled over me as I stared at the words, hoping I was misreading them. But deep down, I knew. I confronted her that night when she returned. She didn't even try to deny it. Her eyes darted away, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. "Yes," she said simply. "I've been seeing someone else." The room spun. My knees felt weak, and I sank into a chair, clutching the edge of the table as though it might anchor me. "Why?" The question barely escaped my lips, a whisper drenched in disbelief. Her response was as cold as it was cruel. "I needed someone who could give me what you couldn't." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the depth of her betrayal. "What I couldn't give you?" My voice cracked. "Caroline, I just lost my parents. I needed you. I needed your support." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "And I needed someone who could keep up with my life. Not someone who's drowning in grief and dragging me down with them." I didn't recognize the woman standing before me. This wasn't the Caroline I married. The woman who had promised to stand by me through sickness and health, through good times and bad. The woman who had vowed to love me unconditionally. That Caroline was gone, replaced by someone cold, selfish, and unrepentant. She dropped another bombshell that night. She was leaving me. "I can't do this anymore, Alex. I'm moving in with Jay." I wanted to beg her to stay, to plead with her to remember the life we had built together. But something inside me stopped. A flicker of anger, of self-respect, ignited deep within my shattered heart. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "If that's what you want, then go." She hesitated, as if surprised by my lack of resistance. But she didn't linger. She grabbed her things and walked out the door, leaving me alone in a house that now felt unbearably empty. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. The smiling faces staring back at me felt like strangers. I wondered if I'd ever truly known her. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of grief, anger, and humiliation. I had lost my parents and my wife in the span of weeks. My world had crumbled, and I was left to pick up the pieces. As the hours ticked by, I made a silent vow to myself. I didn't know how or when, but I would rebuild. I would find a way to move forward, even if it felt impossible in that moment. Caroline's betrayal had taken everything from me, but it wouldn't break me. Not completely. By dawn, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, I made a decision. This was the lowest point of my life, but it wouldn't define me. One way or another, I would rise again. Alex's world felt like it had imploded the moment Caroline walked out, leaving behind only shattered pieces of their life together. The echo of her betrayal reverberated through the walls of their home, amplifying the emptiness. He sat in the living room, staring at the muted television, his parents' framed photos perched on the mantel. Their loss had already created a gaping hole in his heart, and Caroline's departure felt like salt poured directly into the wound. Days passed in a blur of numbness and disbelief. He couldn't bring himself to answer the phone when friends or extended family called to offer their condolences for his parents. Their well-meaning words felt hollow, an unbridgeable gap between their sympathy and the depth of his despair. The voicemail notifications piled up, but he couldn't bear to listen to them. Facing the world seemed impossible. Every corner of the house reminded him of his parents or Caroline. The kitchen, where his mother used to bake, now sat silent. The garden his father had tended so meticulously was overgrown, a stark contrast to the man's pride in its neatness. As for Caroline's lingering presence, her scent still clung faintly to the pillows, mocking him with memories of what once was. Alex had lost not just his partner, but the illusion of stability she had once represented. Grief anchored him to his bed most mornings. The weight of the combined loss rendered him immobile, his body refusing to cooperate with even the simplest of tasks. He barely ate, surviving on water and the occasional piece of bread when hunger became unbearable. Showering felt like a Herculean effort, and shaving became an afterthought. He avoided mirrors, unwilling to face the hollow shell staring back. The double funerals were the culmination of his anguish. Standing at the cemetery, dressed in a borrowed suit that hung loosely on his frame from rapid weight loss, Alex felt the icy grip of despair tighten around him. The minister's words blurred into meaningless noise as he stared at the twin caskets. Friends and family gathered around him, but Alex felt utterly alone. Caroline wasn't there, of course. She had made her choice. In that moment, Alex realized he was mourning more than his parents. He was mourning the life he had once believed he'd built with her. After the funerals, concerned relatives tried to reach out. His cousin Ethan left a casserole and a bottle of whiskey on his porch with a note that simply read, "You're not alone. Call me." Alex appreciated the gesture, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. The idea of explaining his pain, of reliving the details of Caroline's betrayal and his parents' sudden deaths, was too overwhelming. Instead, he retreated further into himself. Late at night, Alex would sit in his father's old armchair, clutching a blanket his mother had crocheted years ago. He tried to find solace in their memory, but grief was relentless, and Caroline's betrayal haunted him in the quiet hours. He replayed every argument, every moment he'd suspected something was off, wondering how he hadn't seen the signs sooner. The weight of self-blame pressed down on him. Had I been too focused on my own grief? Did I miss the warning signs because I trusted her too much? The questions swirled endlessly in his mind, offering no answers, only more pain. As weeks turned into months, Alex's isolation became a routine. The once vibrant man who had always found joy in little things, Sunday morning pancakes, tending to the garden, laughing at old movies, was now a shadow of himself. He avoided the bakery he used to frequent, skipped his daily runs, and left bills unopened on the kitchen counter. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, suffocating him with its silence. Alex's friends, frustrated by his withdrawal, tried to intervene. His best friend, Daniel, showed up unannounced one afternoon, banging on the door until Alex finally opened it. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," Daniel said, stepping into the house that smelled faintly of mildew and neglect. "They wouldn't want you to live like this." Alex wanted to argue, to tell Daniel he didn't understand, but deep down, he knew his friend was right. His parents wouldn't have wanted this. They had raised him to be resilient, to find strength in adversity. But how could he move forward when everything he loved had been ripped away? That night, Alex stood in the bathroom, staring at his reflection for the first time in weeks. The man in the mirror was barely recognizable, gaunt, unkempt, with hollow eyes that told the story of his anguish. He gripped the edges of the sink, his knuckles white, and took a deep breath. He didn't know how, but something had to change. He couldn't live like this anymore. Grief had taken enough from him. It was time to reclaim what little was left. The days blurred together as Alex fought to find a semblance of normalcy. After standing in front of the mirror that night, staring at the shadow of a man he had become, he decided he couldn't let his pain define him any longer. It wasn't a sudden epiphany or a surge of motivation, but rather the quiet realization that if he didn't start moving forward, he might never recover. Alex began with small changes. He set an alarm for 8 a.m. every morning and forced himself out of bed, no matter how exhausted or unmotivated he felt. The house was the first thing that needed attention. Dishes piled in the sink, unopened mail cluttered the counters, and the air was thick with neglect. He spent hours cleaning, scrubbing every corner until the house felt less like a prison and more like a place he could begin to rebuild his life. The physical labor brought a strange sense of relief. As he wiped the grime from surfaces and vacuumed the carpets, Alex felt as though he was clearing the fog that had settled in his mind. Each small accomplishment, a clean kitchen, a freshly made bed, gave him a flicker of pride that had been absent for months. Food was the next hurdle. For weeks, Alex had survived on scraps, barely eating enough to sustain himself. He ventured to the grocery store for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the fluorescent lights and bustling aisles overwhelming him at first. He wandered aimlessly, unsure of what to buy, until he found himself in the produce section. His mother had always loved cooking, and her recipes came flooding back as he stood among the colorful array of fruits and vegetables. He picked up a basket and began filling it, determined to cook a proper meal in her honor. That evening, Alex prepared his mother's favorite dish, roasted chicken with garlic and rosemary. The process was cathartic, each step a reminder of the times he had spent in the kitchen with her, learning to perfect the recipe. When he finally sat down to eat, he felt a pang of loneliness, but also a flicker of hope. This was the first real meal he had cooked since Caroline left, and it felt like a small victory. As the days turned into weeks, Alex continued to make progress. He took long walks around the neighborhood, letting the crisp autumn air clear his mind. The walks became a ritual, a time for reflection and a way to reconnect with the world around him. He began to notice things he hadn't appreciated before. The way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of leaves crunching beneath his feet. Each step felt like a step toward healing. One afternoon, during one of his walks, Alex passed by the community center and noticed a sign advertising therapy sessions. He hesitated for a moment, the idea of opening up to a stranger daunting, but something inside him urged him to take the next step. The following week, he found himself sitting in a small, brightly lit office, nervously fiddling with his hands as he met his therapist, Dr. Morris, for the first time. Dr. Morris was patient and understanding, creating a safe space for Alex to share his pain. The first few sessions were difficult, his emotions raw and his words hesitant, but over time, he began to open up. He spoke about his parents, their sudden deaths, and the overwhelming grief that had consumed him. He talked about Caroline, her betrayal, and the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Dr. Morris helped him navigate these feelings, guiding him toward understanding and acceptance. Therapy became a cornerstone of Alex's recovery. With each session, he uncovered new layers of himself, peeling back the pain to reveal the strength that had always been there. He realized that his worth wasn't tied to Caroline's actions or his parents' absence. He was his own person, capable of rebuilding his life and finding happiness again. One day, as he left a session, Alex spotted a "Help Wanted" sign in the window of a local bookstore. He hadn't worked in months, his old job lost in the haze of grief, but the idea of being surrounded by books felt comforting. He walked in and spoke to the owner, a kind older man named Frank, who offered him a part-time position on the spot. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Working at the bookstore gave Alex a sense of purpose. The quiet atmosphere, the smell of old paper, and the simple act of organizing shelves became a form of therapy in itself. He found solace in the stories he handled daily, each book a reminder that everyone has their struggles, their triumphs, and their journeys. As he settled into his new routine, Alex began to feel the weight of his grief lift, little by little. He wasn't healed, not entirely, but he was no longer drowning. He was learning to swim, finding his rhythm in a life that had once seemed impossible to navigate. And for the first time in months, Alex allowed himself to believe that things could get better. The days that followed were a mixture of hard work and subtle transformations. Alex's routine became more structured as he began to prioritize his physical and mental well-being. The therapy sessions with Dr. Morris, combined with his part-time job at the bookstore, provided him with a newfound sense of stability. The grief that once consumed him was still there, but it no longer defined every moment of his existence. Slowly but surely, Alex was rediscovering who he was. One afternoon, while organizing books in the store, Frank approached him with a curious smile. "You've been doing great work here, Alex," he said, patting him on the shoulder. "I've noticed you have an eye for detail and a knack for connecting with customers. Have you ever thought about taking on more responsibility?" Alex was taken aback. It had been months since anyone had shown faith in him, and the idea of taking on a bigger role filled him with equal parts excitement and apprehension. "I appreciate that, Frank," he replied. "What do you have in mind?" Frank explained that the store was looking to expand its inventory and host more community events, and he wanted Alex to help manage the new initiatives. It wasn't a full-time position, but it was a step up, a sign that his efforts were being recognized. Alex accepted the offer, feeling a small surge of pride. This was a tangible sign that his life was moving forward. As Alex threw himself into his new role, he began to notice changes in himself. His posture improved, his energy levels increased, and the spark of confidence that had been extinguished by grief and betrayal was slowly reigniting. He even found himself smiling more, engaging with customers and forming connections that reminded him of the simple joys of human interaction. One day, while unpacking a shipment of books, Alex stumbled upon a collection of journals. They were leather-bound, with pages that felt smooth and inviting. He decided to purchase one for himself, thinking it might help him process his thoughts. That evening, he sat down at his kitchen table, pen in hand, and began to write. At first, the words came slowly. He wasn't sure where to start or what to say. But as the minutes turned into hours, Alex found himself pouring out everything he had been holding inside. His grief, his anger, his hopes for the future. The act of writing was cathartic, a way to release the emotions he couldn't always articulate in therapy. The journal quickly became a nightly ritual. Each entry was a snapshot of his journey, capturing the small victories and the moments of doubt. He wrote about the customers at the bookstore, the progress he was making in therapy, and the memories of his parents that still brought both pain and comfort. Through the pages of the journal, Alex began to see himself more clearly, a man who had endured immense loss but was determined to rebuild. One evening, as he was writing, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. "I hope you're doing well. Can we talk?" Alex's heart sank as he realized it was from Caroline. He stared at the screen, the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Anger, sadness, and curiosity swirled together, but he didn't respond. Instead, he closed his journal, took a deep breath, and decided to sleep on it. The following day, during his therapy session, Alex brought up the message. "Why now?" he asked Dr. Morris. "Why would she reach out after everything she's done?" Dr. Morris leaned back in his chair, considering Alex's question. "People often reach out for their own reasons, not because they truly care about how you're doing," he said. "The important thing is to focus on what's best for you. Do you feel ready to talk to her, or do you think it would disrupt the progress you've made?" Alex thought about it for a moment. "I don't think I owe her anything," he replied. "But I also don't want to let her presence in my life derail me again." Dr. Morris nodded. "That's a healthy perspective. It's okay to set boundaries and protect yourself." With that advice in mind, Alex decided not to respond to Caroline's message. He deleted it and blocked her number, choosing to focus on his own growth rather than reopen old wounds. It was a small act, but it felt like a victory, a way of reclaiming his power and refusing to let her manipulate him. As the weeks went by, Alex continued to find joy in the small things. He started cooking again, experimenting with new recipes and rediscovering his love for creating something from scratch. He began reading more, diving into novels that transported him to different worlds and reminded him of the beauty of storytelling. And he made an effort to reconnect with old friends, rebuilding the support system he had pushed away during his darkest days. Each day brought new challenges, but Alex faced them with resilience and determination. He was no longer the man who had been abandoned and broken. He was someone who had taken control of his life, carving out a future that was defined by hope and possibility. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt like he was truly living. And as he closed his journal one night, a sense of peace washed over him. this was just the beginning. Alex's life had finally started to find a rhythm again. The wounds left by Caroline's betrayal still ached, but they no longer consumed him. His days at the bookstore were fulfilling, and the time spent journaling had given him a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was building a life of his own, one small step at a time. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when everything changed. Alex was preparing to close the shop when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he hesitated before answering. "Hello," he said cautiously. "Alex, it's Margaret," the voice on the other end replied. Margaret was his parents' longtime attorney, a woman who had guided his family through many legal and financial matters over the years. Her voice was calm but tinged with urgency. "I need to discuss something important with you. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" Alex's mind raced. What could this be about? He hadn't expected to hear from Margaret after settling his parents' estate. "Of course," he said, trying to mask his apprehension. "I'll be there at 10. The next morning, Alex sat in Margaret's plush office, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. She greeted him warmly and gestured for him to sit. "Thank you for coming," she said, placing a thick folder on the desk between them. "There's something we didn't discuss earlier, something your parents wanted me to handle discreetly." Margaret opened the folder to reveal a stack of legal documents. "Your father had a private investment portfolio that wasn't included in the initial estate. He wanted it to be a safety net for you, something that would ensure your future, no matter what happened." Alex blinked, struggling to process her words. "A safety net?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret nodded. "It's a significant sum, Alex. Roughly $7 million. The room seemed to spin as Alex tried to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. $7 million? It was an amount he couldn't even fathom. His parents, who had lived modestly and valued hard work above all else, had left him this unimaginable gift. "Your father always said you had a good heart," Margaret continued. "He wanted you to use this money to build a life you could be proud of, a life that reflects the values he and your mother instilled in you." Alex's emotions swirled. Grief for his parents, gratitude for their foresight, and a growing sense of responsibility. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice shaking. "You don't have to say anything right now," Margaret assured him. "Take your time to process this. The funds will be accessible once the paperwork is finalized. But Alex, this is your chance to start fresh. Use it wisely." As he left Margaret's office, the weight of the inheritance settled on Alex's shoulders. He knew this money had the power to change his life, but it also came with the responsibility of honoring his parents' legacy. He spent the evening in quiet reflection, thinking about how he could use this gift to rebuild his life in a way that would make them proud. The next morning, Alex woke to a flurry of missed calls and messages. His phone buzzed relentlessly, the notifications stacking up faster than he could read them. Most of the messages were from Caroline. "We need to talk. I made a mistake. Please call me. I heard about the inheritance. Can we meet?" Alex's stomach churned as he read her messages. It was clear she had somehow learned about the $7 million, and now she wanted back into his life. The thought of her motives filled him with a mixture of anger and disappointment. Later that day, Caroline's number appeared on his screen again. Against his better judgment, Alex answered, his voice cold and guarded. "What do you want, Caroline?" There was a pause before she spoke, her tone dripping with faux remorse. "Alex, I've been thinking about us, about everything that happened. I know I hurt you, and I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right." Alex clenched his jaw, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. "You want to make things right? Is that before or after you found out about the money?" Caroline stammered, her facade crumbling. I didn't know about the money until recently, but that's not why I'm reaching out. I miss you, Alex. I realize now that I made a terrible mistake leaving you." Alex's laugh was cold and humorless. "You didn't just leave me, Caroline. You betrayed me when I was at my lowest. You chose someone else over me, and now you expect me to believe you've had a change of heart?" Caroline tried to protest, but Alex cut her off. "This isn't about love or regret. It's about greed. You think you can worm your way back into my life because of the inheritance, but let me be clear. You're not getting a single cent stay out of my life, Caroline. He ended the call, his chest heaving with emotion. For the first time, Alex felt a sense of closure. He had faced Caroline head-on and refused to let her manipulate him again. It was a small victory, but it marked a turning point in his journey, a declaration that he was finally taking control of his life. The phone call with Caroline lingered in Alex's mind, but not for the reasons she might have hoped. It wasn't guilt or longing that consumed him. It was a mix of relief and resolve. For years, Caroline's words had held weight, her opinions slicing through his confidence like a hot blade. But now her pleas seemed desperate, hollow, and powerless. He wasn't the same man she'd left behind. As the days passed, Caroline's attempts to contact Alex only intensified. She sent long, rambling texts about their history, carefully curated to tug at his emotions. "Remember when we dreamed about our future? We can still have that, Alex." Another read, "I miss the man who made me feel safe. Don't you miss me too?" Alex read every message, not because he was tempted, but because it served as a reminder of how far he had come. The Alex she missed didn't exist anymore, not for her. He knew the difference now between genuine affection and calculated manipulation, and Caroline's actions screamed the latter. One particularly bold move came when she showed up at his apartment unannounced. Alex returned from a long day at work to find her sitting on the stoop, her expression carefully crafted to look contrite. Her designer coat and flawlessly styled hair were a stark contrast to the raw emotion she was trying to convey. "Alex," she began, her voice trembling as he approached, "I didn't know how else to reach you." "You've been doing a great job of that through texts," Alex replied flatly, stepping past her to unlock his door. "What do you want, Caroline?" She hesitated, clearly thrown by his cold demeanor. I need to talk to you. Please, Alex. Just 5 minutes." Alex sighed, opening the door. "Fine, 5 minutes. That's all you get." He led her inside, motioning for her to sit while he remained standing, arms crossed. Caroline's eyes darted around the apartment, as though taking inventory of the changes in his life. The place was clean and simple, but Alex had added touches of warmth. A new bookshelf filled with novels, framed photographs of his parents, and even a vibrant plant on the windowsill. "You've been doing well," she said softly, almost as if it were an accusation. Alex ignored the comment. "Say what you need to say." Caroline took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears she had undoubtedly practiced. "I made a mistake, Alex. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I've changed. I want to fix things between us." Alex leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "You didn't care about fixing things when you left. You didn't care when you betrayed me. So why now? What's changed?" She faltered, the cracks in her performance starting to show. "I've had time to think, to reflect. I miss you. I miss us. And it has nothing to do with the $7 million you suddenly learned about?" Alex asked, his tone sharp. Caroline's face flushed, her mask slipping. "That's not fair, Alex. It's not about the money. It's always been about the money with you," Alex interrupted, his voice rising. "Do you think I don't see through this act? You left me when I was broken, Caroline. You didn't just walk away. You made it clear that I wasn't good enough for you. And now, because I've inherited a fortune, you want to play house again?" Caroline's tears flowed freely now, but Alex felt nothing but detachment. "I made a mistake," she sobbed. "I didn't know how to handle everything. I was scared. But we can start over, Alex. We can have the life we always talked about." "No," Alex said firmly. "We can't. Because the life we talked about was built on trust, love, and respect. And you destroyed all of that when you walked out on me. You don't get to come back just because it's convenient for you." Caroline's sobs turned to frustration. "You're being cruel, Alex. You're punishing me for one mistake. Don't you believe in forgiveness?" "I do," Alex said, his voice steady. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let you back into my life." "I forgive you, Caroline, but I'll never forget what you did, and I'll never trust you again." Caroline stared at him, her desperation turning to anger. "Fine," she spat. "Keep your money. But don't think for a second that you're better than me. Alex's lips curved into a faint smile. I don't think I'm better than anyone, Caroline, but I know I deserve better than you. With that, he opened the door and gestured for her to leave. She stormed out, her heels clicking against the floor, and Alex closed the door behind her, exhaling deeply. The confrontation had been exhausting, but it felt like a weight had been lifted from his chest. That night, as Alex sat in his living room, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Caroline's return had been a test, and he had passed. For the first time in a long time, he knew he was free. The aftermath of Caroline's dramatic departure lingered in Alex's mind for days, not because he missed her or regretted his decision, but because it reaffirmed how far he had come. Each time his phone buzzed with a text or a call from an unknown number, he knew it was her, trying to weasel her way back into his life. But Alex had made his decision. He ignored every message, deleted every voicemail, and blocked her from every platform. Then came the family. It started with Caroline's mother. Meredith had always been a formidable woman, her tone sharp and condescending. Alex hadn't heard from her since the divorce proceedings began, but now she called him as if they were lifelong friends. Her voice was sickly sweet, the kind of tone that carried hidden daggers. "Alex, darling," she said when he reluctantly answered. "It's been too long. How are you holding up? I heard about the inheritance. $7 million, was it? That's such a blessing after all you've been through." Alex bristled, but kept his tone even. "I'm doing fine, Meredith. What do you need?" "Oh, don't be so defensive, dear. I was just thinking. Caroline has been feeling so lost lately. She's realized how much she loves you, you know? She made a mistake, but haven't we all? I think it's time you two work things out. You're stronger together." Alex clenched his jaw. "Caroline didn't just make a mistake, Meredith. She betrayed me when I was at my lowest. And now that she sees the money, she wants to waltz back in like nothing happened? No." Meredith's sweet tone cracked. "Don't be petty, Alex. Forgiveness is a virtue. Caroline deserves another chance, and you're being cruel by shutting her out. Do you think anyone will respect you if you let your bitterness rule your life?" Alex laughed bitterly. "Respect? Coming from a family that watched me grieve and let Caroline walk all over me? Spare me the lecture, Meredith. This conversation is over." He hung up before she could reply, feeling a surge of satisfaction. But the calls didn't stop. Caroline's father tried next, then her brother, each with their own version of why Alex needed to be the bigger person. He blocked every one of them, unwilling to entertain their manipulative pleas. The final straw came when Meredith showed up at his office unannounced. She swept into the lobby like she owned the place, her designer handbag swinging and her nose turned up at the modest decor. "Alex," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I thought it best to talk face to face." Alex stepped out of his office, keeping his posture tall and his expression calm. "You shouldn't be here, Meredith. Whatever you have to say, I don't want to hear it." She ignored his words, stepping closer. "I understand you're upset. Losing your parents, dealing with a divorce. It's been a lot. But don't let your anger blind you. Caroline is trying to make things right. She wants to rebuild your life together." Alex crossed his arms. "Rebuild? You mean leech off me now that I have money? Let's not pretend this is about love, Meredith." Her facade cracked, and the sharp, condescending tone he remembered so well surfaced. "You ungrateful little. Caroline stood by you for years. She deserves a piece of that inheritance. She's entitled to it." Alex took a step forward, his voice low and steady. "Entitled? She left me when I was burying my parents, Meredith. She didn't stand by me. She ran into someone else's arms. And now you're telling me I should reward her for it? No, she's entitled to nothing." Meredith faltered, her confidence wavering. "You're making a mistake, Alex. You'll regret this." "No," Alex said firmly. "The only mistake I made was letting Caroline and this family control me for so long. That ends now." He gestured toward the door. "We're done here." Meredith huffed, her indignation clear, but she left without another word. As the door closed behind her, Alex exhaled deeply, a mixture of frustration and relief washing over him. He had stood his ground, and it felt good. Later that evening, as Alex sat in his apartment, he reflected on the day. The weight of Caroline's betrayal and her family's manipulation no longer felt as heavy. For the first time, he felt truly in control of his life. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. And no amount of guilt-tripping or manipulation could take that away from him. The calls and visits stopped after that, and Alex knew he had finally put an end to their games. He was free, and it was a freedom he intended to cherish. The day the divorce papers were finalized felt like the closing of a dark chapter in Alex's life. He had signed the documents with an unshakable calm, his signature the final nail in the coffin of a marriage that had once held so much promise but had been reduced to betrayal and greed. The judge ruled in his favor, ensuring that Caroline had no claim to his inheritance or his assets. He left the courthouse that day feeling lighter, as if the weight of years of emotional turmoil had finally lifted. But Caroline wasn't finished. Within days, she filed a petition to contest the divorce settlement, claiming emotional distress and financial dependency. Alex wasn't surprised. It was a desperate move, and he knew she was clutching at straws, trying to salvage something from the wreckage she had caused. His lawyer, Meredith, was confident they would win. "She has no case," Meredith said during their meeting. "Her claims are baseless, and we have all the evidence we need to prove it. Don't worry, Alex. This is just another attempt to manipulate you." Still, Alex couldn't help but feel a flicker of anger. Caroline's audacity seemed boundless. She had betrayed him, abandoned him in his darkest hour, and now she had the nerve to try to take what was rightfully his. He channeled that anger into focus, working closely with Meredith to ensure there were no loopholes Caroline could exploit. The court date arrived, and Alex walked into the courtroom with his head held high. Caroline was already there, sitting next to her lawyer. She looked polished and put together, her expression one of calculated sadness. Alex knew it was all a performance, but he wasn't going to let it rattle him. The proceedings began, and Caroline's lawyer painted a picture of a woman who had been abandoned by her husband, left to fend for herself with no support. "My client has endured significant emotional distress due to the breakdown of this marriage," the lawyer argued. "She gave up her career to support Mr. Harris, only to be left with nothing." Alex's lawyer responded with calm precision, presenting evidence that contradicted Caroline's claims. They showed how Caroline had been unfaithful, how she had left Alex during his time of mourning, and how she had attempted to return only after learning of his inheritance. Meredith's closing argument was damning, highlighting Caroline's manipulative behavior and lack of genuine remorse. When it was Alex's turn to testify, he spoke with quiet conviction. He recounted the events of their marriage, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. He didn't try to paint himself as perfect but emphasized the truth of what had happened. "I gave everything I had to this marriage," he said. "I supported her, I loved her, and I trusted her. But when I needed her most, she walked away. This isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about moving forward and ensuring that I can finally live my life without the shadow of her betrayal." Caroline didn't look at him as he spoke, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. Alex could see the cracks in her composure, the way her carefully crafted facade was starting to crumble. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Caroline's petition was dismissed, and Alex was awarded full control of his assets. As the judge delivered the verdict, Alex felt a surge of relief. It was over. The legal battle, the manipulation, the constant attempts to drag him back into her web, it was finally over. Caroline left the courtroom without a word, her face pale and her shoulders slumped. Alex watched her go, feeling a mixture of pity and triumph. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. That evening, Alex sat in his apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The scars from his marriage would take time to heal, but he knew he was on the right path. For the first time in years, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. He was free to rebuild his life on his terms, without Caroline's shadow looming over him. As he looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Alex allowed himself a small smile. The future was his to shape, and he was ready to embrace it. The weeks following the final court ruling were transformative for Alex. The official end of his marriage brought a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. For the first time in years, he could focus entirely on himself without the weight of Caroline's betrayal dragging him down. He moved into a new apartment, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The fresh start was symbolic, a chance to leave behind the shadows of his old life and embrace a future that was entirely his own. Alex decorated the apartment with care, choosing pieces that reflected his evolving taste and personality. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could finally breathe. His mornings became a cherished routine. He would wake early, brew a strong cup of coffee, and sit by the window, watching the city come to life. The quiet moments were his favorite, a reminder that he had survived the worst and was still standing. He began to find joy in the little things again. Reading books he had always meant to get to, cooking meals for himself, and rediscovering his love for running. Each day felt like a step toward reclaiming the parts of himself he had lost. Professionally, Alex was thriving. His hard work and dedication hadn't gone unnoticed, and his boss offered him a promotion that came with a significant salary increase. The recognition was validating, but it was more than just the money. It was proof that he was capable of achieving greatness on his own terms. He threw himself into his work, leading projects that challenged him and pushed his limits. The sense of accomplishment was exhilarating, and it reminded him of the resilience he had built through his struggles. Outside of work, Alex started reconnecting with old friends and forming new relationships. He joined a local book club, where he met a group of people who shared his love for literature. Their lively discussions and shared laughter became a highlight of his week. He also began volunteering at a community center, helping underprivileged youth with job training and mentorship. Giving back gave him a sense of purpose and fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. Caroline, however, wasn't entirely out of the picture. She sent the occasional message, each one laced with regret and thinly veiled attempts at reconciliation. Alex read them but never responded. He saw through her words, recognizing them for what they were, desperate attempts to regain the life she had thrown away. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet resolve to keep moving forward. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, Alex stumbled upon a photo album from his marriage. The images told a story of a different time, a younger, more hopeful version of himself, standing beside a woman he had once loved deeply. He flipped through the pages slowly, memories surfacing with each turn. There was the photo from their honeymoon in Greece, where they had laughed over shared plates of seafood, and another from their first Christmas together, their smiles wide and genuine. He closed the album and set it aside. Those moments had been real, and they had meant something. But they were in the past, and Alex was no longer the man in those photos. He was stronger now, wiser, and more determined to build a future that reflected the man he had become. One evening, while attending a charity event hosted by the community center, Alex found himself deep in conversation with a woman named Julia. She was vibrant and intelligent, with a quick wit that kept him on his toes. They discovered shared interests in travel and literature, and their laughter filled the room as they exchanged stories. There was an ease between them, a connection that felt natural and unforced. For the first time in a long time, Alex allowed himself to imagine the possibility of opening his heart again. As the evening ended, Julia handed him her number, a playful smile on her lips. "Call me if you want to discuss Hemingway's questionable life choices," she said, her eyes sparkling. Alex chuckled, tucking the number into his pocket. "I'll hold you to that," he replied. Walking home that night, Alex felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. His past had been painful, filled with betrayal and loss, but it had also shaped him into the man he was now. He was grateful for the lessons it had taught him, even if they had come at a high cost. The city lights twinkled above him as he approached his apartment building. He paused for a moment, looking up at the stars. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Alex felt ready to embrace it. Whatever came next, he knew he had the strength to face it head-on. The one-year anniversary of Alex's divorce brought with it a quiet sense of closure. The wounds of the past had finally begun to scar over, leaving only faint reminders of the pain he had endured. He stood on the balcony of his apartment, the cool evening breeze brushing against his face, reflecting on how far he had come. Life had changed in ways Alex never could have imagined. His career was thriving, his social circle had expanded, and he had begun to see the world through a lens of optimism rather than despair. Julia had become a steady presence in his life, her laughter and warmth filling the once empty spaces in his heart. They weren't rushing into anything, but their connection felt genuine, something built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Alex had also found a surprising sense of purpose in his inheritance. The $7 million, which once felt like a bittersweet reminder of his parents' absence, had become a tool for meaningful change. He had used a portion of the money to renovate his parents' old house, turning it into a community space for local artists and entrepreneurs. The building, now bustling with creativity and ambition, felt like a fitting tribute to the values his parents had instilled in him. The remaining funds were carefully invested in causes close to Alex's heart. He established scholarships for underprivileged students, funded local environmental initiatives, and supported mental health programs in the community. Every dollar spent felt like a step toward creating a legacy his parents would have been proud of. Caroline, however, was not entirely gone. Despite their legal battles and her failed attempts at reconciliation, she still sent occasional messages. They ranged from bitter accusations to hollow apologies, but Alex no longer felt the sting of her words. He had learned to separate his self-worth from her opinions, and her messages became little more than static in the background of his life. One day, as he was organizing his office, Alex received a letter from Caroline. Unlike her usual messages, this one was handwritten, the ink smudged in places as if she had hesitated while writing. It read, "Alex, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I wanted to apologize one last time. I see now how much I destroyed what we had, and I can't undo the hurt I caused. You were a better husband than I deserved, and I hope you find happiness. Caroline." Alex folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't closure he needed from her. It was the closure he had already found within himself. Her words were a reminder of how much he had grown, but they didn't hold power over him anymore. He had forgiven her long ago, not for her sake, but for his own. As the days turned into weeks, Alex's life continued to flourish. He and Julia began planning a trip to Europe, a chance to explore the places he had always dreamed of visiting but never prioritized. The idea of standing before the Eiffel Tower or wandering through the streets of Rome filled him with excitement, a stark contrast to the man who had once struggled to get out of bed. One evening, as Alex and Julia prepared dinner together in his kitchen, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about the life you left behind?" she asked gently. He paused, considering her question. "I do," he admitted, "but not with regret. Every part of my past, even the painful ones, brought me to where I am now. It taught me what I deserve, what I'm capable of, and how to stand on my own 2 feet. Julia smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "You've come a long way, Alex. You should be proud of yourself." "I am," he replied, his voice steady. "And I'm grateful for everything, the good, the bad, and everything in between." As they sat down to eat, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. He had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but he had also discovered strength, resilience, and a capacity for growth he hadn't known he possessed. The future was still unwritten, but Alex no longer feared it. He had built a life filled with meaning, love, and purpose, a life he could be proud of. And as he looked across the table at Julia, he realized that the best chapters of his story were still yet to come.